Professor SUMIOKA's University Standard Philosophy course. Hi everyone! So today is empiricism in the 18th century, isn't it?
Although some may call them so, the term is inappropriate. Kant wrongly named it, to contrast with rationalism.
Namely, did Locke and Hume not call themselves so?
Never. Empiric meant a quack doctor, depending only on experience without knowledge.
That's too disrespectful to medical practitioner Locke.
Philosophers in the 18th century were rather speculative, and didn't necessarily value experience. However, that would be hard to understand only by their books, without knowing the context of the history of that time.
What did that mean?
They sought a society to come, by considering their own behavior. So, if we dare to name it, it would be moralism.
Aha, they lived in the age of investment for the future, that no one had not experienced yet.
Hobbes was the same generation as Jansen and Descartes, and served the old Francis Bacon as a secretary. It was the age of the 30 Years' War in Germany, so religious conflict also intensified in Britain. Some disillusioned Puritans emigrated, full of hope as the Pilgrim Fathers, to the new continent in 1620. Still, it was a worse lawless land, fighting with the Native Americans and foreigners from Spain, France, and the Netherlands.
He was too different from the scientific utopia Francis Bacon imaged.
Against the Habsburgs, King James I and his son Charles I supported the Protestants in Germany, but their charging big tax provoked conflict with the parliamentarians. Although Hobbes fled to Paris in 1640, the English Civil War began in 1642. In exile, Hobbes became the tutor of young Charles II.
As well as his master Francis Bacon, Hobbes would be close to the royalists.
In contrast to the optimistic Descartes, who believed that all we need was just to use reason correctly, Hobbes questioned human nature. Excluding judgments of good and evil, he simply regarded passions as the motive of humans. The passions are made in two ways, by the biological consciousness of desire and hate, and by the intellectual imagination of hope and fear.
Here, we see he was not a mere empiricist.
No one is so powerful that he overpowers everyone else. Therefore, when some desire the same thing, they fall into endless fighting. Hobbes described the brutal state of nature as a war of all against all. However, we humans have intellectuality too, and we can expect greater safety by conceding to each other. But that is just a hope, so we also need a power that guarantees it, as the contract for the Commonwealth. He published this social contract theory as Leviathan in 1651.
However, what did the title mean? Leviathan was a sea dragon, wasn't it?
Yeah, some regarded it as a devil, but according to the psalm, it was a mere creature that would die if God did not take care of it.
It's a rather weak beast. Actually, it was killed by the Puritans.
The Puritan Revolution ended by Lord Protector Cromwell's incompetent son, and Charles II came back, as the Restoration in 1660. The Whigs led by Lord Ashley of Shaftesbury, hated James II, Charles II's Catholic younger brother, while the Tories rather sought to ally with Catholic France, for the Anglo-Dutch War.
At that time, both Britain and the Netherlands were yet new emerging countries, and they were competing over expanding overseas.
After the war, fueling theories of the Jesuits' conspiracy, Lord Ashley and the Whigs tried to pass the Catholic Exclusion Act against James II. However, Filmer's Patriarcha was published in 1680, which derived the divine right of kings from Adam of the Bible. So Lord Ashley was conversely accused of high treason, and fell from grace. He went into exile in the Netherlands, with his physician Locke, where he died in 1683.
Spinoza already died in 1677, so Locke could not see him.
When James II ascended to the throne in 1685, he brought the Jesuits into his inner circle. However, his daughter was married to the Prince of Orange in the Netherlands, and the Whigs called on her and her husband to invade England in 1688. James II fled to France without a fight. That was the Glorious Revolution.
Following the wishes of the late Lord Ashley, Locke in the Netherlands must have orchestrated the revolution.
Sure. Locke came back to Britain with the new queen, and supported her husband King William III, publishing 2 treatises of government, and an essay concerning human understanding, in 1689, as a political principle of the new government.
Wait, I understand that the former is political, but why is the latter also so?
Due to his poor health, he perhaps rushed to publish the unfinished books. The first treatise of the former was a rebuttal to Filmer. Although Filmer insisted the divine right of kings comes from Adam, Locke criticized it, saying that, as long as we are all descendants of Adam, everyone is equally king. The problem is the second treatise. After Filmer, Locke assumed Adam's state of nature, like the Garden of Eden without any conflict, quite differently from Hobbes. It was ruled only by the natural law, or God's providence.
Then, there should be no need for any government. Was Locke an anarchist?
However, the interpretation of the natural law may be different, depending on our understanding. So he examined it, like Descartes. As well as God's creation from nothing, he assumed the initial state, as tabula rasa, namely whiteboard, without even the pure reason in our mind, nor the divine right in our society, and all we know is, God only through our experience and reflection.
He was so speculative, but the very empiricism.
In experience, we acquire the physical solidity, extension, motion, and so on of objects, as primary qualities, while color, sound, taste, and so on are the power of the object to make us sensations. Hence, they are secondary qualities and subjective. Furthermore, reflection is a subjective experience of our own inner sensation. When we feel several ideas simultaneously in direct experience or reflection, we make of them complex ideas. Thus, we anticipatively know what causes what. That is understanding.
Understanding goes beyond experience, but already subjective.
Understanding teaches us what our action causes what results, so it makes us enable our free will. Although we do not know what is good and bad, some of the complex ideas contain ideas of pleasure and pain, thus we learn and understand what our actions work well, and what do not, under the natural law. With trial and error, we internalize the natural law as our own morality. Furthermore, we establish it as our common law and government by our social contract.
In other words, we rebuild artificially God's providence as our morality, law, and government.
However, as mentioned, our understanding is already eroded by subjectivity. If we leave it all up to the government, it would do whatever it likes, with its arbitrary understanding, like the Jesuits, friends of James II. Therefore, Locke proposed the separation of the government into the parliament and the executive, in which the parliament legislates laws, with debate about our understanding of the situation and the solution, while the executive realizes it. If the executive won't follow the parliament, we reserve the revolutionary right to replace the executive.
Aha, so that was the justification for the glorious revolution.
Although Lord Ashley III, of Shaftesbury, was influenced by Locke, his grandfather's physician, he was not an empiricist, but a typical moralist. In his inquiry concerning virtue in 1699, and so on, he posed common sense, namely, sensation for community. It is the human innate passion, to accept what people think and say, without his own reflection nor consideration. So we act, not on our experience and understanding, but blindly, for social virtue. Against Hobbes, he said, even if we are wolves, wolves cooperatively work together in a pack, whether that is right or wrong.
As a moralist, he dared to use the words common sense and virtue, ironically.
In 1700, the king of Spanish Habsburg died without an heir. His two elder sisters had married Louis XIV, of the French Bourbon, and Leopold I, of the Austrian Habsburg, so both houses began the War of the Spanish Succession. Britain supported Austria, and fought against France in the new continent. As a result, Britain expanded trading interests in Asia and the Atlantic, as a world empire to replace the Habsburgs, so various projects were planned, leading to an unprecedented boom in stock investment. New inventions reported to Newton's Royal Society, supported it. Everyone gathered in the new fashionable coffee houses, to hear rumors of money-making opportunities.
There would be a lot of fraud stories, among them.
Young Berkley was an Anglican bishop in Ireland, and an extreme empiricist. In his Principles of Human Knowledge in 1710, he regarded even the physical primary qualities as subjective. Everything is in fact just our sensation, so relative to our subjectivity, as immaterialism. Essa est percipi, namely, without perception, no existence.
Certainly, even a movement may not exist before someone observes it, in relation to himself. Conversely, when everyone perceives it, Even a pipe dream without substance may be regarded as existing. However, was it not a collective solipsism?
We cannot choose our perception. It meant, according to him, God makes us perceive the objects. Furthermore, we cannot exist, unless God perceives us anytime anywhere. We have no choice but to obey God, even if unreasonable. He called it, passive obedience.
Although Berkeley looked like Jansenism, what he wanted to explain would be the modern new God, our society. It forces us to recognize even what does not exist, and even if we oppose it, it would rather eliminate us.
Project Mania flooded the town, with mushroom millionaires, or nouveau riche, who so rapidly got big money, and enjoyed extravagant luxury. By showing fighting bees make the hive bigger, a Dutch doctor in London, Mandeville, explained, private vice brings public good, in the Fables of the Bees in 1714, defending the greedy nouveau riche without public morality.
It was also in 1714 that Britain invited the Duke of Hanover to become its king.
Naturally, the book provoked a strong backlash. In addition, in 1720, the stock bubble burst, leaving many people bankrupt. Newton also lost most of his fortune, and said, the movements of celestial bodies can be calculated, but the madness of people is incomputable. A professor at Glasgow University in Scotland, Hutchison, ironically said, without demand, no value, after Berkeley. He insisted that, virtue consists, only when someone needs it, so we should have, reflective moral sense. A Scottish philosophical writer Hume, regarded the mind, as a temporal bundle of perceptions, without even substance than tabula rasa, in the Treatise of Human Nature in 1739. According to Book 1, Understanding, perception is, just a resemblance of the external impression and the internal idea. Simple ideas are made by the memory of past external impressions, but some associate with other ideas, and become complex, by resemblance, contrariety, degrees, and number of the ideas themselves, or by identity, place, and causality in our external experience. Among them, causality has in fact no responding experience. It is based just on past constant conjunction, that we have repeatedly experienced. However, it is abuse of induction, to assume, the future is the same as the past.
Hume was not an empiricist, but rather limited the need and significance of experience. If tomorrow were really all the same as yesterday, the stocks would have risen every day endlessly.
In Book 2, Passion, he said that, some associations relating to ourselves, furthermore produce pleasure or pain sensations, and move us as passions. However, the pleasure and pain are at most anticipative, because our understanding, what action causes what result, is just our belief, based on past repeated experiences, so uncertain. So he concluded, in Book 3, Morals, that morality is sensation. However, as long as we are just temporal bundles of perceptions, we cannot keep it, so we need a government pursuing virtues, with a long-term perspective.
Yeah, we certainly try to do good, but easily get bored and forget all.
In reality, the UK government made poor Scotland, Hume's homeland, suffer with heavy taxes, to intervene in European conflicts. In 1745, while British troops were dispatched to Austria, the Catholic Jacobites, descendants of James II, and his supporters exiled to France, landed in Scotland, and started an uprising. The Stuart family had indeed Scottish origin since James I, however, even the Scottish did not support them, so it failed.
They would think the UK was a little better than the Catholics.
A French noble Montesquieu also regarded the UK as better than the French absolute monarchy, and published anonymously, The Spirit of Law, in 1748. He did not speculatively assume a state of nature, but empirically thought, the geographical climate determines differently, the temperament and needs of the people of each country. So he defined three political systems, despotic, monarchic, and republic.
In the first place, those who talked about the state of nature or the natural law which no one has seen, could not be empiricists, by definition.
According to him, under the despotic system, people are motivated by fear, while under the monarchic by love of honor, and under the republic by love of virtue, or prioritizing public interests over private ones. However if forced, that cannot be the love of honor and virtue. Therefore, people need political liberty, to act voluntarily, so the government should just guarantee our liberty.
Namely, the government should not do unnecessary thing.
In fact, the primary work of the executive is, to resolve everyday's crimes and conflicts. So, even when we separate the legislative power from the executive to the parliament, like Locke, the executive can apply any law to individual cases, with arbitrary interpretation. However, if the parliament debates individual cases, the majority always prevails, and suppresses the minority. Therefore, Montesquieu proposed an independent judiciary, and called for the improvement of criminal and civil laws.
The police on trials under the absolute monarchy must have been extremely mad.
Baumgarten, a professor at Frankfurt an der Oder University, studied the sense of beauty for virtue, in Aesthetica in 1750. For him, beauty is not an objective idea, but a sensation. It is harmonical sensing of plural images, in three levels: composite image, the object and the image, and the expression and the image. When it has their richness, greatness, truth, clarity, obviousness, and life, we feel it as beauty. Although conceiving beauty is the privilege of geniuses, it would be transmitted to the audience, through artworks, and give them sense of beauty, virtue, like an inspiring speech. However, Baumgarten could not finish the latter part.
Baumgarten thought, a moral motivation by art, it would be almost romanticism.
Meanwhile, a French gigolo Rousseau, denied not only art, but even science, in his award-winning essay, Discourse on the Arts and Sciences, in the same 1750. According to him, science and art are just a waste, moreover, the means of tyrants, to tame people as intellectual slaves. In his next Discourse on Inequality in 1755, he explained that, people in the primitive state of nature were, self-sufficient with little relation to others. However, by getting reason, we instead lost morality. In deer hunting, we infer if someone chases a rabbit and leaves his post, the hunt will fail. Therefore, fearing being betrayed, everyone will chase a small rabbit, and we can get a big deer no more.
In the deceptive ancient regime, everyone pursued small successes, making themselves small as well.
Adam Smith studied under Hutcheson, and succeeded him, as a professor at Glasgow University in Scotland. In his theory of moral sentiments in 1759, developing his master Hutcheson's reflective moral sense, depending on the needs of others, he made sympathy the foundation of human nature. Although we cannot directly know what others think, we understand it by imagination, to place ourselves in their situation. However, sympathy turns over again, and brings an understanding of how others evaluate our own actions. Thus, we internalize an impartial spectator, watching our own actions. With it, as we will reward good and revenge evil, we expect reward or revenge, for our own good and evil. Therefore, even if we act selfishly for the expectation, rather realize a good society.
That was the exact opposite conclusion to Rousseau's. The public watching eye-wrecking Freemasonry would be the modern version of Berkeley's God.
The optimist Adam Smith thought that, even the rich consume at most as much as the poor, so that the surplus would benefit the latter too, but Rousseau saw there, the evil domination, that takes away even the human dignity of independence. So, he insisted on the need for a government, to guarantee liberty and equality of people, in the social contract in 1762. However, differently to Hobbes and Locke, for him, the surrender of the inherent rights of the individual is nothing but servitude. Therefore, even when a government is established, it should be rather subordinated to the sovereignty of the people, the general will. The book was banned, and he fled to Hume in England.
Rousseau was reckless to seek the popular sovereignty under the absolute monarchy.
Adam Smith left Glasgow University, to accompany Sir Henry Scott's son, on his grand tour in 1764, so Thomas Reid succeeded him, but Reid was critical of Smith. While Smith artificially constructed the impartial spectator in our respective subjectivities, Reid regarded it, as our public common sense with reality, in an inquiry into the human mind in 1764. Because, our innate common sense is, the fundamental premise and format of reason and sensation, so without it, we cannot think, nor even perceive anything. As well, we act rationally, not by some private passion, but for a concrete public aim, as members of society.
He smells like something of totalitarianism.
After the failure of the Jacobite Rising of 1745, many of them went to the new continent, and dreamed of dominating the pre-settled Protestants, and re-establishing a Catholic England. A Scottish nobleman, James Stuart, also joined the rebellion, fled to France, and remained there, till 1763. After returning to the UK, he published the Principles of Political Economy in 1767, in which He regarded the role of government as just to supply people their needs stably. For this aim, he emphasized colonial exploitation and protective trade. However, British mercantilism caused the American Revolutionary War.
They shallowly thought that enough food stops people from complaining.
Adam Smith had already returned to Scotland in 1766, and against James Stewart, he showed in The Wealth of Nations in 1776, that a nation's wealth is made not of margin profit between purchases and sales, but of productivity itself. When each person strives to pursue maximizing his profit, freely and selfishly, society will naturally be optimized by the invisible hand of God. So he thought, a minimum government should be better.
He was probably opposed to the governmental intervention in the new continent. He was the origin of the limited government policy.
On the other hand, lawyer Bentham in London was critical of the independence of the US. As a utilitarian, his view of humanity is not so far from Adam Smith's, that a human acts following the selfish interest of happiness. However, it is not a simple temporal pleasure, but the integration. Pleasure should be measured by the 7 dimensions: intensity, duration, certainty, propinquity, fecundity, purity, and the extent to the others, and happiness is estimated by the hedonic calculus of their product.
Unlike Hume's impulsivement, we are more rational with the calculus, like Newton's method.
He applied the same hedonic calculus to politics. He insisted we should adopt the policy aiming at the greatest happiness of the greatest number. However, individuals move only with their selfish interest of happiness. So, the government should readjust pleasure and pain with reward and punishment. He published this theory in the Principles of Morals and Legislation in 1789, but it was the year of the passionate French Revolution.
To realize our happiness, he took the big government policy. However, the revolutionary anarchism was further the antithesis against both of the limited and the big government.
The difficulty of ethical philosophy is, opposing theories can be drawn on the same issue. We cannot determine, even whether we humans are rational or emotional, selfish or social.